So in this lecture, we will be discussing about the different variable declarations in JavaScript. Okay, so that is let, var, and const, where the let and const variable declarations were introduced in ES6, that is modern JavaScript, and on the other hand, the var variable declaration is a part of old JavaScript. So let's see few examples of them. So to declare a variable with let keyword, what we use is, and as you can already see, we have already used it in few places earlier. Okay, so this is the variable declaration, this is our variable name, and this is our value, as you might be already aware of this. So when we are using a let keyword, then that means we can mutate the variable later stage. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, we can change the value of the variable later in the code. For example, we have this age variable, and right now we have the value as 34. And down the code, if we want to change the value of this variable, all we need to do is we just need to write the variable and we can change its value. So let allows us to do that. Okay, and this changing of the value of a variable is called as variable mutation. So let's see it in example in console. As you can see, we have mutated the value from 34 to 46, and then we console logged it, so it is giving us 46, the latest value which we have updated. Okay, so let we use when we want to change the value of the variable later in our code. Okay, on the other hand, we have our const variable declaration, which is basically used when we want to use some constant values which are not going to change later in our code. So let's see an example. Let const year of birth equals to 1998. Okay, and if I try to mutate this variable, then let's see what happens. Let's refresh it and see, we got an error saying assignment to a constant variable type error. It is coming from script.js line number 71, which is this line. So that clearly means if you are declaring a variable using const variable declaration, you cannot change its value or mutate that variable later in the code. So make sure whenever you are using a const variable, you don't do such mistakes. Okay, so we use const variables only when we don't want the value of a variable change in our code. Okay, and there is one more thing in this const variable declaration, is that whenever we are declaring a variable with const variable declaration, see, I have removed the value from this const variable declaration, but I'm started to getting error here. Let's refresh it. So the actual error is missing initializer in const declaration. So that means whenever you are declaring a variable with a const variable declaration, then you need to set an initial value to it. Okay, you can't left this variable like this, otherwise you will get the error. So there are two things in const. We can't change the value later in our code when we are using const, and we need to set an initial value when we are using const variable declaration. Okay. So people ask so often which one we should use, let or const. So as I already mentioned, you should prefer const when you think that your variable value should not change later in the code, and if you feel like your variable's value needs to be changed in later in the code, then in that case you can use this let variable declaration. But I suggest to use const more often and let only when you are 100% sure that you are going to change the value of the variable later, because it can leads to some errors changing values of a variable so often. So it's a good practice to use const at initial stage, and if you think your variable's value needs to be changed, then in that case only use let variable declaration. Okay. So on the other hand, we have a var variable declaration, which is this. Okay. So it looks a little bit similar to this, it works a little bit similar to this, but down the surface there is a huge difference between let and var. Okay. So let's see if we can mutate the value of this variable. We can mutate this variable or not. So girl's age at initial stage was 23, and now we are changing it to 46. So let's see what happens. If I refresh it, so again I got no error. That means we can mutate the variable declare with var variable declaration. If we console log the value, you will get the latest value, 46. Alright. But I would not recommend to use var variable declaration at all. And why I'm saying this, because I have a detailed lecture on let, const and var, covering all the basic information about these three in our upcoming sections. And I know I'm keep on saying this from past few lectures, but trust me, for now, for time being, all you need to know is how they works and what is the basic difference between let, var and const. You don't need to know like what is block, which one is block scope, which one is function scope, because you don't even know what is block, what is function right now. Okay. So trust me, in the later sections we will discuss very briefly about let, const and var in the upcoming sections. So for now, all you need to know is the basic difference between these three and how they works. Okay. So that is it for this lecture. uh, and yeah, one more thing, few people point out like we don't even need to use a variable declaration to declare a variable. Okay. So that also let's see. For example, if we don't even use any variable declaration, then also we can create a variable. But this is kind of a horrible mistake, and you should never use such approach to create a variable, because it will create a variable, a property in the global window object. Okay. Instead of uh, creating it in execution context. So those things also we will cover in the lecture where we will be discussing in detail about let, var and const. Okay, so this will also work. Let's see. As you can clearly see, we haven't used let, const or either var, but still our variable is working fine and it is getting mutated as well. See, but you should never do such thing. Okay, it's a very bad practice to not use any variable declaration for a variable. Okay, so that is it guys for this lecture. See you in the next lecture.